Back with you tonight. University of Fort Hare spokesperson JP Roodt says employees who are believed to be suspects, in the murder of 2 staff members were arrested over the weekend. For more on this, we are now in conversation with Asive Dlanjwa, who speaks for the South African Union of Students, and the National Tertiary Education Union Secretary General, Grant Abbott. Gentlemen, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. According to the statement, there's been, of course, investigations that are going on, and what has been found is a hit list containing names of 16 senior officials, mostly members of the executive management. The most senior ones had an amount of 600,000 rands attached to their name. Firstly, what does this tell us about where the tender corruption is now at institutions of higher learning? Then we'll get to the bottom of what is driving that. Asive, let's begin with you.
Thank you, Butabo. I think, number one, we must start by welcoming, firstly, greetings to you and your viewers. I think we must start by welcoming any and all attempts to try and apprehend the corruption, not only at Fort Hare, but even across all other institutions. So I suppose the arrest of the alleged perpetrators in the murder of the 2 staff members from the University of Fort Hare must be welcomed. We do have some reservations which we will share around that. But I think as far as corruption is concerned in institutions of higher learning, there is really the reason it's happening across institutions of higher learning is because it's not a Fort Hare issue, it's not a UP issue, it's not an MUT issue, it's a sectoral issue, and we have been saying that the design and the structural setup of the sector, it makes it amenable and it makes it vulnerable to such acts of corruption as we are seeing in the University of Fort Hare.
Now, Grant, how do you yourself analyze this situation and the kind of killings that have been going on, and of course, how do you receive the news of the arrest?
Good evening, Thabo, and good evening to the viewers as well. I think firstly, very similar to Asive, we would welcome the progress being made in the case. We have to in a case of this nature. And we're glad to see that there is some movement. I think what Asive was talking about in terms of just the corruption within the sector, it is rampant. It is almost as though I would label it university or university capture is what we're seeing outplay in front of our very own eyes, and it's sad because these are supposed to be places that are safe for people to work, safe for people to learn, safe for members to teach. And very much what we see on campuses is a culture of fear, and I would even go so far as to say an environment of terror in some cases, where it is just it's not conducive to good a learning environment. People are afraid for their jobs, they're afraid for their lives. And so we have to start addressing that. I agree with everything that Asive was saying. And we are here to look after our members. But as a stakeholder, and both unions and students, trade unions and student union movements are vital stakeholders in institutions. We are not just an added extra, we're a vital stakeholder, and our voices must be heard, but it seems more and more that our voices are being sidelined or silenced. Yeah. And that needs to change, and particularly at Fort Hare, we think management must be creating an environment where it is safe for people to speak out, whereas what we see isn't really that. And so we invite them to meet with us and say, listen, how are we going to create that environment for people, where it is safe for people to speak out?
Yeah. Asive, the reports indicate that in February, the much called for meeting between the Vice Chancellor of Fort Hare and President Cyril Ramaphosa eventually did happen in Tenes, where he was assured, indeed, that arrests in connection with the matter of Vesele and Roots would soon follow. Now, whenever that happens, there are two reactions to this. One, it could be that police have arrested people just as a PR exercise to show that because the president appeared, an action is now being taken. Or two, one would say it's now being prioritized because it's the vice chancellor and because this matter has received such attention because it has gone to the president's office. When students are raped, they face crime all the time, there are no arrests and nobody actually ever gets to face the law. Where do you see it in terms of your response?
You are not wrong, Butabo. That's exactly what could be the perception. And for two reasons. The first one, what undermines the efforts to fighting corruption, particularly in the University of Fort Hare, is this bravado and ramboness complex that the Vice-Chancellor has there, of believing that he is a lone and the architect of the fight against corruption in the sector. Because what that has done, for instance, before I got on here, I was speaking with the SRC as to what has been the experience. And they are saying some of the things that happen in the fight against corruption at Fort Hare, they learn of in the media. There is no sense of collaborative efforts from the Vice-Chancellor to work with all relevant stakeholders to root out corruption in that institution. And if that had been there, the Vice-Chancellor would begin to also understand and see that the violence that is meted out, that he believes is meted out against his staff, is also the same violence that is meted out against students and other members of the community of Fort Hare. But he can't, because he has personalized and he believes that no, he is the champion and he is the beginning and the end of the fight against corruption. And this is why, which is secondly, the other issue that undermines the fight against corruption in Fort Hare, is that you have a Vice-Chancellor who has a disregard for our constitutional democracy, as it were. He says, no, I don't want to speak to the police officers in here in East London. I don't want to speak to the provincial commissioner. I don't want to speak to anyone. I want to speak directly to the president. That is an undermining of our constitutional democracy, because imagine if everyone who believes that crime has taken place must seek audience with the president for that crime to be dealt with. So what you are saying is true, because this might create an impression that our state institutions and our institutions of law and order are only able to act in the event that someone has gone to sit down and have tea and cookies with the president. So it also begins to undermine the capacity and the integrity and the credibility of our institutions. When one says, the only time I am willing for corruption to be dealt with in Fort Hare is if I meet with the president. I don't want minister, I don't want MEC, I don't want commissioner, I don't want policeman. It's just ludicrous. So really, this bravado Rambo complex of Professor Buhlungu is really going to undermine, because also even in other institutions, other vice-chancellors are going to say, no, we want to meet with the president. They will not believe that there is actually systems, and we will not know the extent to which these systems are effective in rooting out corruption in institutions of higher learning if every time people are going to have to want to meet with the president.
Speaking of those systems, Grant, one of the things that happened was that shortly after that impassioned plea for President Cyril Ramaphosa to come meet with the Vice-Chancellor at Fort Hare, we saw Minister Bheki Cele as well as National Police Commissioner General Fani Masamula. At the time, he was still Deputy Minister of State Security, Zizi Kota. They went there. And part of the things that they did was to establish a multidisciplinary task team. The systems that Asive is talking about, how do we rate the work of these structures that are set up, I suppose, one, to investigate this one because an incident has already happened, but I suppose we must have a broader conversation of a multidisciplinary task team that is always there really to ensure the safety of staff and students at institutions of higher learning?
Thabo, yeah, you are correct. It's a multi I can't remember the word you were saying, but mine would be to say it's a multi-stakeholder approach that has to be taken. It's not around a single personality in a single office. It can't be. A vice-chancellor isn't the superhero, and because something happens to him now, everyone must come running. That's not the model that we have. There's a model that we have in society and within our constitution, which is around collective leadership, collective responsibility, collective approaches, and that's why there are important stakeholders like unions that are in institutions, like student movements, and we have to find ways to work together. I am concerned that sometimes, because now it is a vice-chancellor or a very high-up person that's the focus, that suddenly everyone starts jumping. What about the ordinary member and the ordinary student and the ordinary lecturer who just wants to get on with the job but is facing these fears, and things just don't seem to happen unless there's an unequalness in our society in that sense. And we can't continue to just allow that to happen. We have to take seriously, if we're going to talk about things like social compacts, and if we're going to talk about things like collective leadership, then we have to actually mean that, and we need to sit around a table and have all the relevant stakeholders talking around the table on those matters, and not just essentially ministers coming down at the behest of a vice-chancellor. It's a little bit too much like a PR exercise for me, and I'm concerned that sometimes these very important matters live and die with a PR exercise, and that's why we keep going around in circles and not getting to the real solutions. So I would say we need to be looking at a multi-stakeholder kind of leadership system, and it's there already. It just must be properly utilized.
Gentlemen, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on tonight. That is South African Union of Students spokesperson Asive Dlanjwa and Grant Abbott, the Secretary General of the National Tertiary Education Union.